"You don't belong here, Dad. Honestly, you're just an embarrassment." Those words weren't whispered. They weren't hidden. They were said loud enough for the entire reception hall to hear. My son, Daniel, stood at the head table on his wedding day in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, looking down at me with that smug grin I had only recently come to recognize. The band had stopped mid-song. Guests froze with forks in hand. My ex-wife shifted uncomfortably, pretending she hadn't heard it. But I heard it, and it cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. I sat there, stunned, while his new bride, Allison, leaned in close to him and whispered something in his ear. Whatever it was, it made him laugh harder. Laughter. At me, his own father. I'd raised that boy alone for years after his mother left. Worked double shifts at the Quaker Oats plant in Cedar Rapids, pulling 60-hour weeks just to keep food on the table and the mortgage paid. Every birthday, every Christmas, I was there. I thought I had done right by him. But looking into his eyes that night, I realized something. I hadn't raised the son I thought I had. The whispers started moving through the tables. Folks I had known for decades, neighbors, old friends, even my brother-in-law, they all turned to look at me. Not with sympathy, but with curiosity, like I was a character in a play and the script had just twisted. I excused myself quietly and walked out to the parking lot, the cool September air hitting me like a splash of water. I could still hear the laughter from inside, muffled by the heavy wooden doors. My hands shook as I fumbled for my truck keys. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. But as I sat there in the cab of my old Ford, the memories came rushing in. The nights I patched Daniel's shoes with duct tape because we couldn't afford new ones. The mornings I skipped breakfast so he could have an extra egg. The day I signed over partial rights to the family house so his mother could keep custody and he'd always have a roof over his head. And now, years later, on the happiest day of his life, I was nothing more than an embarrassment. But here's the thing. That house, the one I nearly destroyed myself to keep, it wasn't entirely his. There were still strings attached. Strings Daniel had ignored. Strings I had never pulled. Until that moment, I leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at the wedding venue glowing under the streetlights. My humiliation had lit a fire I thought had gone out years ago. I wasn't just going to sit there and take it. No, not this time. If my son thought I didn't belong in his life, then maybe it was time he learned who really owned the ground he stood on. And that's when the idea first took root. A plan that would not just restore my dignity, but force Daniel and Allison to face a truth they had spent years overlooking. Because the house they thought would be their legacy, it was still mine, and I was done being invisible. The drive home that night felt longer than it should have. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, headlights carving through the quiet Iowa back roads. Every so often, the sound of Daniel's laughter echoed in my head. That mocking grin, his bride whispering in his ear like I was the punchline to a cruel joke, it wouldn't leave me. By the time I pulled into my gravel driveway, the anger had started to simmer. I sat there in the dark cab of my Ford, staring at the porch light I'd left on earlier. That old house, 2 stories of cedar siding and peeling paint, had stood for nearly 100 years. My father had worked himself into an early grave paying it off. Then I did the same, just to keep it from foreclosure when Daniel was still in middle school. And yet, everyone, Daniel, my ex-wife, even half the town, acted like it belonged to him already. Like I was just a guest in my own home, waiting to fade away. The next morning, I got a call. "Dad," Daniel said, his tone as smug as it had been the night before. "About the house, we're going to need the deed transferred sooner rather than later. Allison and I are planning to remodel. Honestly, it's for the best. That place is falling apart, and, well, you don't really need it anymore." I stayed silent for a long moment, the phone pressed against my ear. Then I asked quietly, "And where do you expect me to live, son?" Daniel chuckled. "There's a retirement complex in town. Allison's parents know the owner. It'd be good for you. Meals, medical staff, people your age. You'll finally have some company instead of rattling around that house all alone." There it was. They wanted me out. Not tomorrow. Not next year. "Now, I see," I muttered. "You'll thank us for this one day," Daniel said. "Anyway, think it over. We'll swing by this weekend with the paperwork." Then he hung up. Think it over. Like I hadn't already been thinking about it all night. That evening, I drove down to O'Malley's Diner on 3rd Street, the kind of place where gossip traveled faster than the coffee was poured. I ordered meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and sure enough, within minutes, 2 old-timers at the counter were whispering. "Did you hear about Tom's boy?" One said. "Yeah, marrying into money, huh? Allison's folks got that insurance business. Poor Tom. Bet they'll shove him out of that house next." I pretended not to hear, but every word was another nail in the coffin of my pride. By the time I paid the bill and stepped out into the chilly autumn air, I knew what had to be done. The house wasn't Daniel's. Not yet. I'd never fully signed it over. Years back, when my ex and I split, the lawyers had pushed for me to transfer ownership so Daniel would have security. But I'd insisted on a clause. Life tenancy. As long as I lived, the property remained legally mine. Nobody, not Daniel, not Allison, not my ex, could force me out. But Daniel didn't know that. He thought I was just waiting around to hand him the keys. That Friday, they showed up. Daniel in his pressed khakis, Allison in some designer coat that didn't belong anywhere near an Iowa front porch. They walked in without knocking, like they already owned the place. "Dad," Daniel said, laying a stack of papers on the dining table. "We've drafted the transfer. It's just a formality at this point. All you need to do is sign." Allison smiled that thin, sharp smile of hers. "Don't worry, Tom. We'll take good care of the place. Maybe even name one of the guest rooms after you." I looked at the papers, my hands steady now. "You want me to sign today?" "Why wait?" Daniel asked, leaning back in his chair. "Let's make this official. It's time for you to stop holding on and let the next generation step in." For a long moment, I just stared at my son. My boy who once begged me to fix his bike with duct tape, who cried the night his mother walked out, who I carried on my shoulders at the county fair so he could see the fireworks. And now, here he was, trying to erase me. I slid the papers back across the table without signing. "Not today," I said. Daniel's grin faltered. Allison's smile disappeared entirely. "Excuse me?" she asked. I said, "Not today." Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be. You can't keep living here forever. This house is ours. Everyone knows it." I met his eyes. "Everyone may think they know. But the truth? That's something else entirely." Allison shifted uncomfortably. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stood, my chair scraping the hardwood floor. "It means you've underestimated me. And you're about to find out just how wrong you've been." Their faces drained of color, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of strength return, because I wasn't going to let them write me out of my own story. Not without a fight. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight crept through the lace curtains in the kitchen, painting golden stripes across the worn linoleum floor. I brewed coffee in my old percolator, the same one I'd used since Daniel was a boy, and sat at the table where just last night he and Allison had tried to corner me into signing away my home. I couldn't shake the look on their faces when I refused. Shock, frustration, and beneath it all, fear. That was the part that stuck with me. They weren't expecting me to fight back. They thought I'd just roll over like a beaten dog. But I wasn't beaten. Not yet. After finishing my coffee, I drove into town. The fall wind was brisk, swirling orange leaves across Main Street. I parked outside the law office of Carter and Hughes, a small brick building with a faded sign. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile before leading me back to see David Carter, a man I'd gone to high school with 40 years ago. "Tom," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his suit neat but not flashy, the way small-town lawyers always looked. "Haven't seen you since the Kiwanis fundraiser last spring. What brings you in?" I sat down, nerves thrumming in my chest. "It's about my son. And this house." I explained everything: the wedding, the insults, the demand for me to sign over the deed. David listened carefully, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally adjusting his glasses. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Tom, you were smart all those years ago. That life estate clause you insisted on? It's ironclad. As long as you're alive, the house is yours. Daniel and Allison have no legal right to force you out. Not now, not ever." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "They're not going to take no for an answer," I said. I saw it in their eyes. "They'll keep pushing, maybe even try to trick me into signing something I don't understand." David nodded slowly. "Then don't just defend yourself, Tom. Get ahead of them. Make it clear who's in charge." I raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Simple," David said, sliding the yellow pad across to me. "File a notice with the county recorder's office reaffirming your life tenancy. That way, if Daniel or Allison tries to make a move, the public record will already show the truth. And if they're foolish enough to push harder, well, we'll be ready." I stared at the neat handwriting on the pad, reaffirming my life tenancy. It felt like more than a legal maneuver. It felt like taking back my dignity. "Do it," I said. By the end of that week, the paperwork was filed. My name, Thomas Reed, was once again cemented in county records as the rightful occupant of 412 Willow Creek Road until the day I died. I thought that would buy me some peace. But Daniel and Allison weren't about to give up so easily. Saturday evening, they showed up unannounced again. This time, Daniel didn't bother with pleasantries. He barged in, his face red, Allison trailing behind him like a storm cloud. "What the hell did you do, Dad?" he barked. "We heard from a friend at the county office. You've been filing paperwork, making this more complicated than it needs to be." I stayed seated in my recliner, calm as could be. I did what any man would do when someone tries to take his home. I protected it. Allison crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "Do you realize how selfish you sound? Daniel and I are starting a family. We need that house. And you, an old man, living alone, are hogging it out of spite." I chuckled, the sound surprising even me. "Selfish? That house was built by my father's hands, paid for with my blood, sweat, and years in a factory that broke my back. And now you want to waltz in, slap a fresh coat of paint, and call it yours?" Daniel's eyes narrowed. "It is mine, Dad. Everyone knows it. You're just delaying the inevitable." I leaned forward, my voice steady but sharp. "No, son. What's inevitable is the truth. And the truth has a funny way of coming out when people push too hard." Silence hung heavy in the room. Allison shifted, clearly uncomfortable, while Daniel clenched his fists. For a moment I thought he might lash out. But then he turned, muttering under his breath. "This isn't over," he said, storming out the door. Allison shot me a glare before following. The house fell quiet again. But the storm was brewing. I knew it. They weren't going to stop until they'd either broken me or I broke them. And if it came to that, well, I already knew which way it would go, because I had a plan. It was a crisp Sunday morning in late October when the showdown began. I hadn't planned it that way, but life has a way of pushing things into the open. Our family was gathered at St. Andrew's Church for the baptism of my niece's baby girl. Everyone from the Reed side and Allison's family showed up. The old church smelled of hymn books, lemon oil, and fresh flowers, exactly the kind of place where small-town gossip thrived. And wouldn't you know it, Daniel made sure to take center stage. As we all gathered in the fellowship hall after the service, sipping weak coffee out of styrofoam cups, Daniel decided it was the perfect time to air his grievances. "Funny thing about old folks," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the room. "They don't know when to step aside. Some people just hold on to things long past their time." My eyes lifted from my coffee. He wasn't even looking at me, but everyone knew who he meant. A few heads turned in my direction, waiting for me to react. Allison chimed in, her voice sweet as poison. "It's such a shame. We'd love to move into that house and keep it in the family, but—" She let her words dangle in the air like bait. A ripple of whispers swept through the room. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I stayed seated. Calm. Still. Then Daniel went for the kill. Truth is, Dad's not thinking clearly anymore. Signing legal documents he doesn't even understand. It's sad, really. That was it. I set my coffee down slowly, the styrofoam crinkling under my grip. "Is that so?" I said, loud enough for the entire fellowship hall to hear. The room went quiet. Even the baby stopped fussing. Daniel smirked. "Dad, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it is," I said, standing up. My voice was steady, measured. "Since you've chosen to make it public, let's set the record straight." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I'd been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "This," I said, unfolding the papers and holding them high, "is a certified copy from the county recorder's office. It states in plain English that I, Thomas Reed, retain full rights to live in my home until the day I die. No one, not even my own son, can take that away from me." Gasps and murmurs echoed through the room. A few older relatives nodded, their faces hardening with disapproval toward Daniel. But I wasn't finished. "You all know me," I continued. "I worked 40 years at the mill, raised my son in that house, paid off every dime of that mortgage while putting food on the table. And now, my son," I pointed directly at Daniel, who had turned pale as chalk, "mocked me at his own wedding, then tried to bully me into signing away my dignity. In front of strangers. In front of God." The fellowship hall was so quiet you could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Daniel sputtered. "Dad, this isn't how it looks." "Oh, it's exactly how it looks," I said, my voice cutting through his protest. "And I'll tell you something else. Any more stunts like this, and I'll not only reaffirm my rights, I'll rewrite my will. And you'll find out the hard way what it feels like to be left with nothing." The color drained from his face. Allison tugged at his arm, whispering furiously. But the damage was done. The room had already judged him. My sister's husband muttered under his breath, "Ungrateful punk." I folded the documents carefully and tucked them back into my pocket. Then I turned to the pastor, who looked like he'd rather melt into the floor. "Apologies, Reverend, but I wasn't about to let lies stand in the Lord's house." He gave me a slow nod. "Truth has its place here, Tom." And with that, I sat back down, calm as ever, while Daniel stood frozen, the entire town staring at him. But even then, I knew this wasn't the end. No, Daniel wasn't the type to lick his wounds quietly. He'd try again. And the next time, I had to be ready. Not just to defend myself, but to end it once and for all. Because sometimes, to protect what's yours, you have to take more than one stand. And I was prepared to do just that. You'd think that public humiliation at the church would have been enough to put Daniel in his place. But arrogance doesn't die easy. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't handwritten. No, this was typed, cold, with the signature of a lawyer from Cedar Rapids at the bottom. Daniel was contesting the occupancy clause. He wanted to take me to court. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the letter trembling in my hands. The smell of leftover coffee lingered in the air, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. My boy, my only son, was dragging me into a courtroom like I was some squatter in my own house. That was the night I made my decision. If Daniel wanted a fight, I'd give him one. But it wouldn't be the kind of fight he expected. The day of the hearing came fast. The Lynn County Courthouse stood tall and gray under a steel sky, the flag snapping in the cold Iowa wind. Inside, the wooden benches creaked under the weight of townsfolk who'd heard whispers of the case. Small towns don't need newspapers. Word travels on its own. Daniel sat on one side of the courtroom with Allison at his elbow, her designer purse perched like a trophy beside her. He looked smug, confident, like he already had the victory in his pocket. I sat on the other side with my lawyer, an old friend named Frank Delaney. Frank had been around long enough to know every trick in the book, and he wasn't about to let Daniel's fancy lawyer outmaneuver him. When the judge asked Daniel's lawyer to present the case, the man spoke with all the pomp of someone who thought he was already billing by the hour. "Your Honor, my client seeks rightful possession of the property currently occupied by his father. Mr. Reed Sr. signed a quitclaim deed transferring ownership to his son. However, given his advanced age and diminished capacity, we argue he did not fully understand the nature of the transaction." A low murmur swept through the benches. Diminished capacity. The words stung, but I stayed calm. Frank rose slowly, his voice steady. "Your Honor, we expected this argument. And we're prepared." He walked to the evidence table and laid down a thick folder. "Here is the notarized occupancy clause, signed on the same day as the quitclaim deed, witnessed by two parties and filed legally with the county recorder's office. It explicitly states that Thomas Reed retains the right to reside in the property until his death. Any challenge to this is not only unfounded, it's malicious." The judge adjusted her glasses. "I see." Frank wasn't done. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have reason to believe my client's son attempted to coerce and manipulate him into relinquishing his rights under false pretenses. We've subpoenaed bank records, text messages, and witness statements to support this." Daniel shifted in his seat. Allison's confident smirk faltered. And then Frank delivered the final blow. "We'd also like to enter into evidence a voicemail recording, inadvertently left on Mr. Reed's phone, in which Daniel Reed and his wife discuss getting the old man out of the house before winter so they can move in. Their words, not ours." The judge's brow furrowed. "Play the recording." The courtroom went silent as the audio crackled through the speaker. Daniel's voice filled the room, clear as day. "Once Dad's out, we can gut the place and make it ours. He won't fight it. He's too weak. Just give him a push." Gasps. Whispers. Heads shaking in disgust. Daniel's face drained of color. Allison looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. The judge banged her gavel. "I've heard enough. The occupancy clause is valid. The challenge is dismissed. Furthermore, given the clear evidence of coercion and intent to defraud, this court will be referring the matter for potential criminal investigation." The words hit Daniel like a hammer. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Allison clutched his arm, hissing, "Do something!" But there was nothing left to do. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt 20 years younger. The autumn air smelled sweeter, sharper, like freedom itself. People patted me on the back, whispering, "Good for you, Tom," as I passed. For once, Daniel wasn't the golden boy. He was the disgrace of the town, the son who tried to steal from his own father and got caught red-handed. And me? I went home to my little white farmhouse, the one with peeling paint and a sagging porch, and I sat in my favorite chair by the window. The house creaked around me like an old friend. Mine, still mine, always mine. I didn't get everything I wanted out of life, but that day I got something better. I got my dignity back, and Daniel? He lost more than just a case. He lost respect, reputation, and maybe, just maybe, the last shred of my trust. Like I said before, sometimes, to protect what's yours, you have to take a stand, and I took mine. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.